Cloud. Here we are. Professor Ko, good morning, or indeed good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for coming to join us.
My pleasure.
Now, Professor Ko, we thought it'd be really interesting if you were able to give us generally an update on the COVID-19 response in Korea. Obviously, there's been a variety of different state responses to the pandemic, ranging from huge increase in state surveillance through to just sort of allowing herd immunity, as appears to be the case in Sweden, through to the kind of civic technology that has been noted by many analysts as being dominant in Taiwan, through to quite low-tech, militarily enforced lockdowns in certain states that don't have as well-developed informational and healthcare structures in place. But Korea seems to have really led the way in a number of respects, particularly around contact tracing. So it'd be great if you could speak a little bit to the Korean response, when they first realized there was a problem, what tools and techniques they put in place to deal with it, and then the ramifications of those.
Okay. I prepared PowerPoint.
Oh, absolutely. Okay.
I'll share what I prepared.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Okay. Can everybody see my slide?
I believe so. I believe so. If anyone is struggle to see the slide, please feel free to drop us a message in the Q&A section of the chat screen that you have there.
Okay.
But
okay.
It should be fine, Professor Ko.
Okay. I have about 10 slides, and while things are changing constantly in Korea, not just about the data in general, but also how to regulate what we can do in terms of gathering data and doing contact tracing. So I'll, in about 10 minutes or so, I'll give you an overview of what has been happening in Korea. So I assume everybody is generally familiar with the general trend. I mean, in the case of Korea, the past 3 or 4 weeks, the number of new patients have been relatively steady. So we had several thousand patients sudden outbreak sometime in February, but in the past month, the rate of increase in terms of the number of patients has been less than 1% a week, and one of the reasons why Korea could contain the spread of the virus was attributed to its aggressive contact tracing strategy. So last week there was an article in The Economist. It categorized strategies into 3 types. The first one was quarantine and documentation. The second was contact tracing, and the third was modeling. And Korea has been using all 3 types of strategies, but among the 3, Korea has been using contact tracing in a very aggressive manner. And by contact tracing means tracing at an individual level, trying to find out a person's whereabouts during the past several days, a very detailed manner. And how come it's taking place in Korea? For example, in China, doing something similar, many people would assume the government or the party just gives a mandate. In Korea, the legal system is not like that, obviously. And Korea actually has very stringent data privacy law. The law called Personal Information Protection Act of 20, it's typo, it says 2010, it's not, it is 2011. The law has been amended a few times, but in any event, this law, for short, PIPA, has very strong consent regime. So basically, you need consent to get information, personal information from data subject. And you just cannot reveal personal data or transfer the personal data to a third party. And in particular, for what's called sensitive information, which includes information about health, there's even more stringent consent requirement. So in general, without consent from data subject, you just cannot collect personal data. But there was some caveat. There was an exception for temporary processing in an emergency situation for public safety and well-being, and that includes public hygiene. And that, whether that kind of caveat could be used in this pandemic situation is not entirely clear. I mean, the law text of the law says it's for temporary processing, and what has been taking place is, no one will say this is just very temporary measure. It could be called some sort of interim or emergency measure. So there is some room for controversy. And there was a MERS outbreak in Korea in 2015. It's compared to current COVID-19 pandemic, it's very small scale. But at that time, the whole country was surprised. There were, I think, about 40 people who died, and there were several hundred infected. And at the time, already there was a debate as to whether we should employ contact tracing, and actually something similar to what has been taking place during this pandemic took place at the time. Trying to find exact whereabouts of an infected during the past several days by utilizing location data, in particular data from public transportation and also card transaction data. I mean, in Korea, credit and debit card is used very extensive manner. In my example, I seldom use cash for any type of transaction. So that means, that implicate that somebody who has my transaction data for credit card or debit card, they would easily figure out where I have been. So during the MERS outbreak, credit card companies provided that information to central authority, and there was, it was viewed inevitable to do so at the time, but at the same time, some people, including myself, raised concern whether that's allowed by law, or whether it's really legitimate, or how to safeguard privacy. And then, this is how the MERS outbreak took place. And there was one super spreader. One person who was hospitalized, he infected dozens of people, and that's when the general public got surprised, and the general opinion supported extensive and detailed tracing. And after the MERS outbreak was contained, the public opinion supported this kind of detailed tracing. So the law was amended, not Personal Information Protection Act, but this law, Contagious Disease Prevention and Control Act. This law was amended. This law was amended right after a MERS outbreak in 2015 and subsequently a couple more times. And with the amendment of this law, the government now can collect and process and transfer to a third party pretty extensive information about an individual. You can divide this information into 7 subcategories. The first one, PII, is short for personally identifiable information, such as name, resident registration number, which is an ID number for like every person living in Korea, address and phone number, that sort of information, and also medical information and prescription information, and immigration record, and card transaction data for credit card, debit card, and prepaid card, and transit pass record, meaning record from your use of public transportation, and CCTV footage. I mean, CCTV is very widely used in Korea, perhaps as widely as in London. And location data that comes from telecom companies, cell ID and GPS. So this is the picture. You get location information from mobile carriers, personal identification information from government agency, prescription data or medical data from hospitals or national health insurance agencies. I mean, Korea has national health insurance scheme. So there are a lot of differences in the details, but and there, in the grand scheme, there are similarities to NHS in the UK, in the sense that the national scheme covers everybody in the country. And immigration record from immigration service, card data from credit card companies, transit record from transit pass issuers, and CCTV from the police. And all this information goes to Ministry of Health and Welfare, and also to Korean CDC, Korean Center for Disease Control. And this Korean Center for Disease Control, they use this information for epidemiological and health purposes. And they also disclose the information to the general public. And at the same time, Korean CDC forwarded information to municipal and local government. And then municipal and local government, some of the municipal and local governments, they themselves disclose location information of the infected. So there are 2 windows through which the general public get the information about the whereabouts of the infected. One from Korean CDC, and the other from municipal or local government. This picture, the left-hand side, this is in Korean, and this is an example of what was revealed by a municipal government. You see on the right-hand side, the vertical line, the numbers, that's date. For example, at the top, 2.20, that means February 20th. And below, you see 221, that means February 21st, February 22nd, like that. And shows in chronological manner a person's whereabouts in very detail, and not just detail, but it provides names of business establishments. For example, this person went to a grocery, and even the name of the grocery is provided in this window. And there obviously, people could easily figure out where this is, and there were concerns as to the privacy aspect of this infected person, and what he has been doing, where he has been visiting, and at the same time, this business establishment, once this location is known to the public, the public agency would go there immediately and do some perform some hygienic measures, and after a day or two, it should be fine to open this place again. But the general public, just because of the image that this place was visited by the infected, the businesses suffer a long negative impact. So there was some controversy surrounding the details of the information, how detailed it should be, and Korean CDC issued a guideline suggesting that the precise address and names of the businesses should not be revealed. And Korean CDC has been complying with its own guidelines, but municipal and local governments, they interpreted these guidelines in their own terms. So there is some degree of lack of consistency among the municipal and local governments. So this is my final slide. I think there's inherent dilemma as to utilizing the tracing strategy and respecting the privacy. Contact tracing is extremely useful for epidemiological purpose and also public health purposes. But about disclosing whereabouts of the infected, the Korean public opinion seems to support disclosure, but it's not clear what level of detail, how granular it should be. If you ask any person, perhaps in Korea, there would be support for detailed information disclosure. At least that's the current atmosphere. But obviously there is a cost in terms of privacy. In this disclosure scheme, names of the infected are not revealed, but sometimes could be revealed. Names could be revealed, re-identified, and sometimes their embarrassing personal details are revealed or inferred, and even if re-identification does not take place, for example, patient patient number is given, so the scheme uses pseudonymization. For example, patient 31, that person is vilified as a super spreader, and some other individual, the public has suspicion that this person was having outside the marital affair. That's sort of negative inference. And outside the personal information aspect, businesses have been suffering. In particular, the places where the infected visited, they suffer long-lasting business impact. So how to reconcile that sort of privacy implications, that long-term agenda that our society would need to deal with. Yeah, so that's what I prepared. So I closed my window, and now.
Thank you. Well, Professor
Yeah.
Ko, that was really fascinating. I was particularly struck by the that slide you showed of all the different authorities that can send in information and how that triggers the warnings, then how there's this other option for warnings being triggered of the municipal authorities. May I ask, you referred in your table of the legislation close to the beginning of the, you had an extract from a couple of statutes there. There's the word temporary. How long is it anticipated that government authorities and municipal authorities will now hold the data they've derived from the Centre for Disease Control? When does it have to be deleted, if ever?
They say they will delete once this pandemic is over.
Right.
That's a very good question. They just said it, they'll delete it, but they didn't make it clear how they will do it, or whether there'll be like outside audit or that sort of verification mechanism.
And of course, I suppose there's a question of who gets to decide when the emergency is over. What if the emergency continues for years and years and gets normalized?
Yeah, and also a few days ago, they began utilizing the mechanics they prepared for smart city. And actually, smart city, the idea of smart city has been there for some time, but it has not been really taking off. But once they put in place this mechanism, the people who have been engaged in the smart city idea, they'll try to take advantage of this system that they just developed. So we'll have to see what happens after this pandemic is gone. Yeah,
absolutely. I think the smart city connection to the pandemic response is a hugely interesting one. We have a smart cities expert speaking tomorrow, actually, from the Benchmark Institute here in the UK. I'm particularly struck because obviously, Korea has had this strong response where the government has, I guess, obliged all sorts of actors, such as credit card companies, to give over the personal data of their clients. But of course, Korea is a democracy, where democracy has been around now for a few decades. What is the view amongst the Korean political and academic class of society when they look at the measures that are taking place in China and the approach that the Chinese state has had? You mentioned smart cities. I immediately started thinking, potential for algorithmic control, that traffic light system with the red, the green, and the I think is it the yellow?
Yeah.
What's the view on that in Korea? What are the perceptions there? Could Korea do the same?
That's an interesting question. I mean, Korea, in some very abstract sense, follows like Western style liberal democracy, but at the same time, there are people who think the way China handled the situation is pretty efficient and effective. So in the current pandemic situation, if you ask people in Korea, there could be a good number of people who would have favorable view, about the kind of different color code system employed in China. But I suspect that would not be the majority. But nonetheless, there will be some people, I suspect.
one of the things we had when Professor Yu was speaking earlier, he spoke to the legitimacy of nation states in their response to this crisis and whatever subsequent crisis appear to now follow this big crisis, right, as the knock-on effects carry on. I wonder, is the willingness of Koreans to deal with this? We've heard there was the heritage of the MERS crisis, and I guess SARS as well, more generally in East Asia. But what is it that enables society to trust the government with all of this data and to obey? Is it I guess the fact there's conscription in Korea, there's more of a sort of concept of the need for a strong government? What are the cultural factors at play there? So I think cultural factors are quite important.
Yeah, that's true. And so about disclosing this location data of an infected individual to the general public, myself has some sort of ambivalence, because if you give to the general public very abstract level of data, the public may begin to form some sort of suspicion as to, the government only has detailed data and the general public just cannot get access to the detailed data. That means perhaps the government is hiding something. But if, the other side of the coin is, once you give detailed data to the general public, there'll be all sort of implications on privacy. So, I think there should be balance to be made, between that sort of giving, transparent information and getting trust from the general public, and privacy aspect, and perhaps the government, the current Korean government, is mindful of that aspect, because the MERS outbreak at the time, there were a lot of suspicions and rumors about what government does and what it's capable of doing or incapable of doing, and the current Korean government is trying to, at least trying to cast the image that the government is trying its best to be transparent. So there are a bit of rumors here and there, but overall, the level of trust, at least about this pandemic, the level is relatively high, I think. And about the data from telecom carriers and credit card companies, telcos in many countries, very heavily regulated, and usually in oligopoly situation. In Korea, there are only 3 telecom carriers, mobile carriers. So their price scheme is very heavily regulated. So they have every reason to give favor or react favorably to the government request. And also about credit card companies, they are in competition, but there are 5 dominant credit card companies. So it's close to oligopoly, and they also are subject to heavy regulation. So the business entities in regulated industry, they just cannot say no to the government.
Interesting. Yes, but that's a good point. Market dynamics is forcing attitudes here.
Interesting. Can I make a comment and maybe ask a question?
Of course.
So, Professor Ko, good morning or good evening. Good to see you through this forum. So, I think it's interesting. There was a BBC interview by the foreign minister of South Korea, and where she emphasized the transparency and openness, which is obviously a very important principle of a democratic society. But, you know, at the same time, what is being ignored is right not to be transparent. You know, so it is on one hand, you know, the transparency seems to be an important principle, but when that transparency is being forced rather than volunteered, and I wonder that is another form of you know, the sort of the top-down and potentially authoritarian you know, government regime. So I think there's some kind of like a built-in irony or paradox there when citizens are being forced to be transparent rather than given a chance to be transparent. I think there's a big difference, and I think there is, again, I think this is a, you know, very difficult problem, because obviously there is a public, you know, good that can come from that transparency. So on one hand, we can see it, but, you know, we have already seen in the U.S. There's a relaxation of HIPAA, you know, the regulations, right? So that all of a sudden, doctors are able to use you know, insecure line of communication to share very private you know, patient information, you know, through their textings and Skypes and this and that, which used to be not allowed. So in this, you know, current situation, we can say, oh yeah, you know, but like I said, you know, nobody knows what will be the normal again, whether we will ever go back to normal. So we may live in this kind of like a healthcare crisis forever, you know, that everybody is wearing masks in a public space. So I think it is, you know, really important for us to think about, you know, what are different, because it's the democracy and open society is multidimensional construct. It's not singular construct. So it should be that, shouldn't be the case that a single principle trump all the other values. And I think it is very important for us to try to, you know, strike a balance among those.
Yeah, that's Alex, excellent point. And you know, in privacy, you know, in the past several years in Europe in particular, there has been controversy surrounding the concept of right to be forgotten, and in Korea there's some you know, there was some similar debate, but that sort of concept is not very familiar to the general public in Korea. And in this kind of pandemic and emergency situation, the Korean general attitude is kind of binary or bipolar, depending on how you see it. It's kind of going to from one extreme to the other. So under the current environment, if you argue for your own privacy, you know, you can easily be subject to ridicule, you know, arguing for something very fanciful, not realistic, and the, you know, general attitude would be, this is just a very special situation. Individual liberty should be ignored. That's kind of general attitude. And also in law, that, you know, that kind of attitude is reflected, I think. I mean, compared to European EU's GDPR, GDPR, there are provisions on this kind of pandemic situation, and even under pandemic, individuals' data privacy should be respected, and there should be some sort of balance to be considered. In Korea's law that I explained, there's no provision, explicit provision in the law. Even if you do contact tracing, you should respect privacy. There is no that sort of provision out there. It just says under the emergency situation, no room for individual liberty. At least that's what the law says. So that's kind of one big hole, I think.
Something Western journalists, I guess, would usually interpose at this point is the presumption that perhaps Korean society, for deep cultural reasons, is more collectivist in its approach than the apparently, debatably, highly individualistic ones of, at any rate, Western Europe and the United States. Do you think that's true, or do you think that's
yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
In general, Korea is a conformist society.
Mm-hmm.
So in Korea, everybody wears a surgical mask, and say if you go out and for some personal belief you try not to wear a mask, and everybody would look at you.
Yeah. Interesting. I think one of the things, just hearing from what Professor Yu was just saying, about the state of emergency, I guess the terrifying thing is that, state of emergencies, they can just last for years and years. I mean, there's multiple states all around the world that declared a state of emergency and it just never went away, right? It could just be there for 10 years. And I think particularly in the context of this pandemic with a virus that's now globally spread.
I think just think about 9/11. We now live with a permanent state of, under the terrorist, threat in the airport. We now routinely subject ourselves to a very inconvenient, our experience of air travel has forever changed, right? There is no chance of your loved ones come to the gate and, welcoming you the moment you arrive. That is like gone, and then no one ever, question like why we do it, right? Yeah. So I really think that we have to think carefully about, oh yeah, this is an emergency situation, but when you look back, it could be the just beginning of a new normal. And in this current administration in the US, right, every utterance that the president did, said was like, oh my God, he just broke another, taboo, but then it's just a normal, it's okay, right? So one after another, we have demonstrated, the society has demonstrated that we are incredibly malleable in terms of accepting new normal. So yeah. I wouldn't count on that as our safeguard in any way.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Which makes it all the more important to build applications that are structured to encourage the kind of normal we'd like to see, the interactions and the norms and the practices that underlie free individuals who control their data. Well,
in terms of law, specific law, I think we'll have to see what happens, but this kind of exception is not provided in Personal Information Protection Act, but rather in a special law on infectious disease. So that means once this infectious disease, the pandemic is over, the provisions in this law are not applicable. So at least in theory, maybe the engineering mechanism should still be out there, but the law itself would not be applicable. So that there could be some difference just because these provisions are not in general data privacy law.
Interesting. Well, Professor Ko, thank you so much for your time. It's been a really interesting talk. It's been recorded, so I've no doubt that as particularly our hackathon participants in the East and West Coast of the United States wake up, they'll start accessing it. And yeah, I think it'll be a really useful input into people's thinking on contract tracing in particular, and some of the risks therein and how states are thinking about it. So thank you very much. If you have any time today, we'd love to have you join us on the Slack channels and perhaps mentoring teams and commenting and answering questions if you have any time. If not, then I can just simply say thanks so much for your insights. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, I'll join Slack and get access from time to time.
Great stuff. Great stuff. I'll send you the link now just to make sure you have it.
Okay, great.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye, all,
Bye-bye.
and we'll come back at 1 BST. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.